never believed in ghosts or spirits. Not really. My friends Danny, Lucas, and Emma used to joke about it all the time, but I always rolled my eyes. They'd be talking about some creepy, haunted house or the spirit world, and I'd just laugh it off. That was until the night we decided to try the Ouija board. It wasn't even supposed to be a big deal. We were at Emma's house. It was a Friday, the weekend before Halloween, and she had recently found an old Ouija board at a garage sale. It was worn, the letters faded, and the planchette was cracked along one edge. The first thing I thought was, this is just some old junk. It's probably fake. But my friends were persistent. Emma, excited and giddy, suggested we try it out in the basement. The basement was dimly lit with a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting strange shadows against the cracked walls. As we sat in a circle on the cold cement floor, Danny laid the Ouija board between us, his fingers almost trembling as he touched the planchette. The air felt strangely heavy. I joked about how dangerous it all was, but honestly, I just wanted to see how stupid it all was. First, nothing happened. The planchette barely moved, just sliding awkwardly beneath our fingers. We all laughed, and Lucas started making fun of it, saying, well, looks like we're not dead yet. Emma was getting a little frustrated, and Danny just kept asking random, stupid questions like, who's going to win the game this weekend? Then something changed. The planchette suddenly jerked toward the letter C. The atmosphere shifted in a way I can't really explain, like the air thickened and the temperature dropped. I glanced at Emma, who looked almost pale, and Danny looked confused. Lucas snorted, thinking it was just a trick. But I felt it too. A subtle pressure, like someone was standing just behind me. Who's there? I asked, trying to get it over with. The planchette moved again. Slowly, it spelled out the word, THAT. That what? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It didn't move for a few moments, but then, just as I was about to dismiss it, the planchette moved again. This time it spelled out, I am here. A chill ran through me. Something wasn't right. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. Emma was visibly shaken, her fingers gripping the planchette tightly. Danny was too quiet, and Lucas' usual bravado was replaced by a tense silence. Then the lights flickered, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just a power surge. I'd heard about old houses having flickering lights, especially in basements. But as the lights blinked again, I felt the room grow colder, like someone had opened a freezer door in the middle of winter. My breath formed small clouds of vapor in the air, and the sound of our breathing became muffled, like we were underwater. Did you guys feel that? I asked, my voice shaky. No one responded. I turned to look at Emma, but her eyes were fixed on the planchette, her face pale, her lips trembling. She wasn't blinking. Danny shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room. Okay, that's enough. Let's put it away, and before he could finish, the planchette jerked again, dragging my fingers with it. It slid quickly across the board, stopping at yes. My heart skipped a beat. A flood of dread washed over me, but I was frozen in place. I couldn't speak. The planchette didn't stop there. It moved again. This time it spelled out one word: leave. Emma's hands were shaking now, and the sound of her breath was the only thing I could hear. Danny's expression twisted with confusion, but I could see it in his eyes. He was scared too. He tried to pull his hands away, but the planchette didn't let go. Continued to move, dragging all of us along with it. Who are you? I blurted out, but the words felt foolish even as they left my lips. I didn't believe in this stuff, but I had to ask. The planchette hesitated for a moment, then slid across the board once more, spelling out a name: Charles. I felt the air shift again. This time, I could hear something, whispers, barely audible, like they were coming from all around me, but no one else was speaking. I looked around, my heart racing. It wasn't coming from any of us. Who's Charles? Lucas asked, trying to laugh it off, but his voice was strained, too high-pitched. He wasn't laughing anymore, but there was no answer. The whispers seemed to grow louder, and suddenly the air pressure in the room was so intense that it felt like the walls were closing in on us. My ears rang with the sound of it, a low, bone-chilling hum that made my skin crawl. I stood up, and without thinking, I grabbed the board. Enough, I'm done. But as I yanked it away, something slammed into my back. I stumbled forward, my heart leaping into my throat. It was as if something invisible had pushed me. The others were still sitting, stunned, not moving, their eyes wide with terror. The whispers stopped, and then the lights went out. The moment the lights went out, the basement was plunged into total darkness. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. I tried to steady my breath, but it came in shallow gasps, each one sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, praying for even the faintest glow of light. But there was nothing. The phone had died, its screen black and unresponsive. "Emma?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was no answer. "Lucas?" I could hear their breathing, shallow and rapid, but no one spoke. The air was so thick, it felt like it was pressing down on me. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I froze. They weren't human footsteps. They weren't even close to a person walking. More like something dragging itself across the floor, heavy and uneven. I spun around, my heart in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Whatever was in this room with us was close. It was standing right behind me. I could almost hear its breath. "Get the hell out of here," Danny finally hissed, his voice a whisper of panic. But no one moved. We were paralyzed by fear, our bodies frozen in place, as if some unseen force had its grip on us. And then, in the pitch-black silence, the whispers returned. Louder this time, hissing voices, a chorus of unintelligible words. But I could feel them. The words were for me, for all of us. We were being spoken to. Out of nowhere, a harsh, cold gust of wind slammed into my face, making me stagger backward. I reached out, my hands finding the cold stone wall of the basement for support. I pressed my back against it, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The wind was unnatural. It was moving through the basement like it had a life of its own. Then, in the midst of the chaos, I heard something else. Something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a whisper or a voice. It was a laugh. A low, guttural laugh that reverberated off the walls, rattling my bones. It was coming from directly behind me. I whipped around, my heart nearly stopping. There, just beyond the reach of my vision, I saw a figure. It was faint, like a shadow, but it was standing in the darkness, watching me. It was tall, too tall, and its eyes gleamed faintly with a sickly yellow hue, like they were glowing from within. "Charles?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow twitched, a slow movement, as if acknowledging me. But it didn't speak. It didn't need to. The air was thick with a presence, an oppressive weight that crushed the very life out of me. Before I could react, the basement light flickered back on. But when I looked around, everything was different. Emma was gone. The light flickered back on, bright and blinding, but the basement was not as it had been. The air felt charged, electric with a palpable tension. My heart was still hammering in my chest, my breath ragged and shallow, but I couldn't look away from the space where Emma had been sitting just moments before. She was gone, vanished, not even a trace. "Emma?" I choked out, my voice breaking, but there was no response, not even the faintest sound. I glanced around the room, desperate, but nothing seemed right. The shadows were deeper, more oppressive. I could feel them pressing in from all sides, stretching and creeping like dark, malevolent fingers. Danny and Lucas were still frozen, their eyes wide with terror. Neither of them moved. "Danny, Lucas, Emma's gone," I shouted, my voice desperate now, tinged with panic. "Where the hell is she?" But no one answered. They didn't even blink. I looked at the Ouija board again, and a cold dread crept over me. It was still there, resting between us, but the planchette was no longer on the board. It had moved, not to any letter, but to the center, resting motionless as if it were waiting. The room felt suffocating. The shadows seemed to twist and move, coiling around me, as if they were alive. I stumbled back, my hands trembling, desperate to escape the suffocating feeling that seemed to close in on me from all directions. Suddenly, I heard it, the sound of Emma's voice, distant but unmistakable. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." Her voice was faint, filled with a kind of desperation that made my stomach churn. "Emma," I cried, my voice cracking with fear. I turned to Danny and Lucas, but they didn't react. They were statues, unmoving, as if the world had forgotten them. It was as if they weren't even there. The voice grew louder, more desperate. "Help me, please. Charles is coming. He won't let me go." I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing. No Emma, no shadow, just the eerie quiet of the basement. The voice had stopped. The light flickered again, and for a split second, I saw it, a flash of movement in the corner of the room. A figure standing just beyond the light's reach. It was tall, looming, and its eyes, those glowing yellow eyes, locked on me. It was Charles. Couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as the figure in the shadows began to move toward me. Slowly, methodically, like it was savoring each step. My body screamed for me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. It reached out and I saw its hand. A grotesque, bony thing, covered in pale, translucent skin, with long, claw-like fingers that twitched with anticipation. The moment its hand touched my shoulder, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. Time lost all meaning the moment the darkness consumed me. But when I woke up, I was no longer in the basement. I was lying on the cold ground, my face pressed against something rough and damp. I shot up, gasping for air, my heart thudding violently in my chest. My head felt heavy, like I was waking from a deep, unnatural sleep. I looked around, disoriented, but I wasn't in the basement anymore. The familiar setting of Emma's house was gone. I was outside, in the middle of a dense, fog-covered forest. The trees were tall and twisted, their branches stretching out like claws. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I could barely see through the fog. Everything was muffled, distant, as if I were underwater. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and tried to collect my thoughts. How had I gotten here? Was this a dream? Then I remembered. The figure, the hands, the voice. It was real. All of it was real. "Emma?" I whispered into the cold air, but my voice sounded weak, swallowed by the fog. I felt alone, so alone. I tried to move, to find a way out of the forest, but the trees seemed to close in on me, their branches blocking every possible path. Felt like the forest was alive, watching me, trapping me. And then I heard it again, the voice, Emma's voice. "Help me." It echoed around me, pulling me deeper into the trees. My legs felt heavy, my steps dragging as I moved toward the sound. I wasn't sure if I was walking toward safety or into something far worse, but I couldn't just stand there, not after hearing her. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, the fog seemed to grow thicker, and the temperature dropped even further. I could see my breath clouding in front of me, but there was no sign of Emma, no trace of anything familiar, only the haunting whispers, coming from all directions. The voice called again, more frantic this time. "Charles is here. You have to stop him. Help me. He's not human." I froze. The last words sent a shiver down my spine, my blood running cold. He's not human? What did that mean? What was Charles? Before I could process it, the ground beneath me gave way. I fell, tumbling down a steep slope, hitting rocks and branches along the way. I crashed to the bottom, my body slamming into the dirt. Pain shot through me, but I forced myself to stand. I looked up, and that's when I saw it, Charles. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me, his yellow eyes glowing even brighter in the fog. His figure was monstrous, towering over me, and I could see the twisted, unnatural shape of his body. His limbs were elongated, twisted in ways they shouldn't have been. His face, if it could even be called that, was a grotesque mask of shadow, with thin, black veins running across it like cracks in porcelain. I stumbled back, fear clenching at my throat. I had no idea what I was dealing with. All I knew was that it wasn't human. Then Charles spoke. His voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was loud, clear, and filled with an icy malevolence that made my blood run cold. "You shouldn't have played with the board," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "You invited me, and now, you're mine." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "You're mine." I felt every inch of my body freeze at the sound of Charles's voice. It wasn't just cold. It was suffocating, as if the very air around me had turned to ice. I could hardly breathe, my lungs constricted in terror. Charles took a slow step forward, his long, twisted limbs extending with a grotesque grace. Each movement seemed deliberate, measured, like a predator savoring the hunt. The ground beneath his feet cracked with every step, as if the earth itself couldn't bear his weight. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey me. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by an overwhelming force, as though something was pressing on my chest, holding me in place. "Please, don't," I gasped, my voice trembling. I wanted to scream, but the words got stuck in my throat. Fear wrapped itself around me, choking me. Charles smiled, or at least I think he did. His face was a twisted, inhuman mask, but the motion of his lips shifting upward was unmistakable. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the kind of smile that made you wish you were anywhere but here. It was the smile of something that took pleasure in fear. "You should never have called me," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "The board is a doorway, a fragile little opening between worlds. And once you invite something in, there's no closing it." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "I didn't know." "We didn't mean to, you never mean to," he interrupted, his voice growing darker. "But that doesn't matter. Now you'll stay with me, forever." I tried to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was completely at his mercy. There was no escaping this, no fighting it. And then, I heard Emma's voice again, echoing in my mind. "You have to stop him. Find a way to break the connection. Before it's too late." A rush of adrenaline flooded my system. Emma was still alive. She had to be. She had sent me a warning. "Charles," I managed to croak, my throat tight. "I won't be yours. I'll find a way to break the curse. You can't control me. You can't control any of us." Charles's expression didn't change. His eyes narrowed, glowing brighter, and the air seemed to grow even colder. He took another step forward, and the earth trembled beneath him. "You think you have a choice?" he growled. "You think you can break the bond? You can't. It's too late for that." "But," he paused, considering, his twisted grin widening. "I can offer you a deal." "A deal?" The words didn't make sense, but in that moment my instincts told me to listen. I had nothing to lose. "What kind of deal?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You'll take my place," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You'll become my servant. In return, I'll let her go. I'll let Emma go. You have the power to save her, but only if you accept." My heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could I really save Emma by making such a sacrifice? But the thought of becoming the thought of serving this monster forever was unbearable. I knew that no matter what I chose, there would be consequences. But what choice did I have? "I won't," I began, but Charles raised a hand, cutting me off. "You will," he said simply. "You will make the choice, or she dies. It's your life, or hers." His words struck like a blow to my chest. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't save her if I didn't accept, but the idea of becoming his servant, of being bound to him for eternity, was that really a price I was willing to pay? The world around me felt like it was closing in, the fog swirling faster, the trees bending toward me like they were alive. My mind raced. I could hear Emma's voice, faint, pleading, whispering in the back of my head, desperate for me to make the right choice. But how could I? Charles's eyes never left mine, his grotesque smile widening with each second that passed. The silence between us grew unbearable, the tension hanging thick in the air like a storm ready to break. "You can't do this to me," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You can't make me choose. There has to be another way." Charles tilted his head, as though amused. "There is no other way," he said, his voice a soft, cruel lullaby. "You've already crossed the line. Now you either pay the price or lose everything." I felt the weight of his words like an anchor, dragging me deeper into the abyss. But deep down, I knew something. There had to be a way to outsmart him. If I could break the bond, if I could find a way to escape this curse, I could save Emma without giving myself over to him. But how? My eyes wandered to the Ouija board still lying in the foggy clearing, the planchette motionless at the center, waiting for another hand to guide it. I remembered what Emma had said before. The key was in breaking the connection. I had to sever it. I didn't know if it would work, but it was the only chance I had. "No," Charles hissed, as if he could read my thoughts. His form shifted, twitching in the air as though he was fighting to maintain his hold. "You will not break free from me. You will not." I lunged for the board. My fingers shook as I grabbed the planchette, the cold wood of the board beneath my hands like ice. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. Emma had to be freed. I had to make this right. "Goodbye, Charles," I whispered, my fingers pressing down hard on the planchette, willing all my fear, all my anger, into one final, desperate act. And then the impossible happened. The planchette moved, slowly at first, then faster, sliding across the board with a force that I couldn't understand. Spun wildly, but I wasn't guiding it anymore. Something else was. The air around me crackled with energy, and Charles screamed, a high-pitched, otherworldly shriek that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. I felt it, the bond between us shattering. Like glass breaking under pressure, the connection between me and Charles fractured and splintered. The ground trembled violently. The trees around me bent and twisted, their branches snapping like dry twigs. The fog began to swirl, spinning faster and faster, until the world seemed to collapse in on itself. And then, with a deafening roar, everything went black. When I awoke, I was back in Emma's basement. The old board was gone. The air was still, silent, like nothing had happened. I stood up shakily, my body aching, my mind reeling from everything I had just experienced. I looked around, my heart in my throat, but Emma was there, sitting on the floor, wide-eyed, but alive. "Emma," I whispered, rushing to her side. "You're okay. You're really okay." She looked at me, confused, as though she didn't understand what had happened. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quiet, as if waking from a deep sleep. I wanted to tell her everything, about the deal, about the shadow, the whispers, the terror. But I couldn't explain it. Not yet. The darkness was still fresh in my mind, the weight of it pressing on my chest, and I couldn't bring myself to speak of it. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever that thing was, Charles, it wasn't gone. It was still out there, somewhere. And though we were free, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting, because some doors, once opened, never truly close.